Tibet is being oppressed by China is because they pose a threat to the Chinese government. I don't see why removing this threat is going to give any incentive to the Chinese government to further oppress the Taiwanese people or take away their rights. They gave a very good analysis on how Taiwanese people enjoy their freedom. We didn't see any mechanization of the incentives of the Chinese government to take away those things when the Taiwanese government is actively saying that they're willing to comply to China, right? I think we give you a better mechanization of long-term stability in terms of internal politics of Taiwan, as well as a huge market for economic growth. This is why we are very proud to propose this motion. Two clashes in today's debate. One, what is the reaction of China? And secondly, which is politically and economically better for the Taiwanese people? Firstly, on Chinese oppression. I think they talked a lot about how people are enjoying their rights, or people who are LGBTQ can now have rights, and those things aren't happening in China. We can see the fact that Taiwan is probably more progressive than China. The problem is, I don't see any incentive for the Chinese government to interfere with those rights. The reason is, one, when a country says that they're going to concede, they're going to integrate to China to some extent, like Macau, or like in those kind of forms, the Chinese government know that by oppressing them, there's going to be a high likelihood of the people of Taiwan changing their minds, right? When the government is saying that we're going to integrate to China and they start oppressing you, the public reaction and the international reaction is obviously going to go against China. China does not have an incentive to create more chaos in the Taiwanese region if we don't see a mechanism. Yes. Secondly, they talked about how things like indigenous people's rights, or things like the people who are being kidnapped in other regions, right? We have a couple of responses to that. Firstly, these things are happening in the status quo. Note that the only thing that can be achieved inside opposition is the continuation of the status quo. In the status quo, China is already oppressing people to some extent. The Taiwanese activists being kidnapped in China, those things are not mutually exclusive. We are telling you that when the Taiwanese government is posing a compromise, the Taiwanese government can now officially have ties with the Chinese government, which means that they can have negotiations. In the status quo, the Chinese government can simply say that we're not going to have any interaction with you, we're not going to have any negotiations with you, because you're illegitimate, you're a group of terrorists taking over the sovereign territory of China. This doesn't happen in our side of the house. I think they can get some sort of recognition as a governing body within the region of Taiwan. I think that is comparatively better than the status quo in which China is legitimate and completely ignoring all kinds of negotiations that's posing from Taiwan. Yeah.
The local governments that represent that region have been stripped of and replaced by Chinese communist puppets in places like Tibet, in places like Uyghur. How are you going to get the representative Taiwanese people if you're just going to have communists ruling that area?
I think there's a couple of responses to that. Firstly, that is not going to happen because literally the Tibetan people want revolution. Right? That is not the case in Taiwan. The Taiwanese people aren't holding on to weapons and fighting against the Chinese government. They gave an example of 50 years ago that in 1970s people was revolting. We think in 50 years the context has completely changed. The economic policies of China, which was the main reason why Taiwan wanted independence in the first place, is now more capitalistic. It goes aligned with the ideology of many Taiwanese individuals, and I think people who were fighting against China 50 years ago is probably a very small portion of the population. I don't think young people care about those ideologies. I don't think they want a new form of revolution. Secondly, on economy. They said that in the status quo, Taiwan is already strong economically, and there is no need to integrate to China. Two responses to that. One, the fact that they have a strong economy is contingent on the fact that China does not put sanctions on them. Note that the power balance between China and Taiwan is extreme, right? If China wants to go in and destroy the Taiwanese economy when they feel that Taiwan is posing a greater threat than potential, I think these things it is very unstable as Taiwan to rely on the fact that China isn't going to sanction them. The reason why this is very important is because Taiwan used to have backing of the United States. This is fading away because the United States of America is now focusing on their own domestic economy rather than expansionism. We think these things are very important analysis coming from our side of the house that has been completely neglected by side opposition. But secondly, we think that these companies can now access Chinese resources, which is a good thing, right? They talked about how the board members are probably going to be based on communist groups or so forth. But even in that kind of context, at least those people can have access to the Communist Party's resources. We think in terms of development, that is something that is very good for the Taiwanese economy. But furthermore, note that if they concede to the fact that Taiwan has a very strong economic industry, China now has a specific incentive to invest in those kind of industries, specifically because the Taiwanese growth in economy now means the Chinese growth of economy, right? We think things like taxation being put on Taiwan to some extent can be an incentive for China to invest specifically in those regions. China can cater to other regions, other countries, to expand Taiwanese products, to expand the technological industries to other countries. I think it is comparatively so much better for these companies, and insofar as we both concede that economy is an important flashpoint, we think it is much more stable. Even if the United States of America gives us backlash, I think it is better comparatively to have China as your ally than the United States of America, because there's so many countries like the ASEAN or Africa, those new markets that is contingent on your relationship with China. I think this is much more stable. At the end of the day, what we need to recognize that whatever they say or what kind of principle that they tell you, this continuation of the status quo is their best case scenario. We are telling you that things like development is more likely to happen. We are telling you that backlash from the Chinese government or oppression can be mitigated so far as you open a new negotiation body that can be officially recognized by the Chinese state. We think China has no incentive to further their oppression. I think China is more likely to even become progressive through negotiating with Taiwan. I think for these reasons, we are very proud to